fog, rivalries, and an illogical use of a moustache. Here are 7 things only 90s gamers will remember. Now, most of us enjoy a bit of nostalgia now and then. It's only natural to take a look back at the way things were once in a while as we forge a path through the present as sensible, responsible adults. But as we celebrate the World Wide Web's 30th birthday this week, there are those of us who can't quite let go of a bygone era of technology.
And what a bygone era it was back in the 1990s. It seemed like every week there was a new best game ever that reinvented the medium and found an extra dimension. Such was the pace of technical and creative development back in the days when light beige was the be-all and end-all of computer equipment. Who could resist the temptation to slip into a daydream every now and again and remember the way things were?
Happily, that's exactly what I want to do right now. So let's travel back through the mists of time and look back on 7 things only 90s gamers will remember.
And we were being quite literal when we said mists. You see, a peculiar trend kicked in during the late 1990s that saw many of our favourite virtual destinations enshrouded in fog. Not the kind of impressive particle effects that give modern open world games their splendour either, more like the "we can't actually render more than 6 feet in front of you without crashing your PC" variety of fog.
1997's Turok Dinosaur Hunter is often remembered as the worst culprit, but really they were all at it. Shadow Man, Hidden and Dangerous, Omicron, the Nomad Soul, Outcast. Basically, if you're a game with the letter O in your title released in the 90s, you had some fog in you.
Here it is in the aforementioned Hidden and Dangerous, doing a 5 out of 10 job of disguising the fact that the draw distances are super low. Mind all those impossible to see baddies on the bridge. And here's Shadow Man, trying its best to turn a technical limitation into spooky atmosphere. Points for trying, you voodoo-loving baldy.
Okay, let's just get this thing over with.
Fog wasn't only used in 3D games though, nor was it only used to justify a narrow depth of view. Over in strategy gaming, the 1990s brought a new concept to the table, the fog of war.
The darkness that surrounds you at the beginning of each RTS game represents all the land you haven't explored yet. It's out of view, ergo it doesn't exist. Command & Conquer kicked this off in 1995, and by the decade's end, the idea had spread like wildfire. You can't see where you haven't been. Solving puzzles in the 90s wasn't about applying logic to a problem, or even using lateral thinking. No, taking on an adventure game 3 decades ago was to stare into the very eye of insanity.
The name's Knight. Gabriel Knight.
Let me give you an example. In present day real world, if I wanted to get into the kit cupboard, I go and ask Matt for the key and then unlock the door. If I want to achieve the same task in a 1990s puzzle game, Matt's placed the key in the mouth of a statue that's only accessible when the sun hits the window from a certain way, and I've previously aligned all the tiles on a parquet floor to spell out the initials of an ancient Templar knight. But don't take my word for it, look at this nonsense.
Here's a highlight from the end of the decade in the form of Gabriel Knight 3. The eponymous Gabriel needs to disguise himself as a man called Mosley by, wait for it, attaching some masking tape to a hole and scaring a black cat so it runs past it, and some of the fur sticks on the tape.
It worked.
He then affixes that tape to his face and uses some maple syrup, and voila, the perfect fake moustache, which he's using to disguise himself as a man who doesn't have a moustache.
It's great to see you. Great.
Yeah.
This kind of logic ran riot in the 90s. Even respectable, critically beloved games like Monkey Island 2 were at it.
Here it is presenting you with a waterfall and expecting you to figure out that in order to pass it, you need to hypnotise a monkey by sticking a banana on a metronome and then carrying it to a water shut-off valve to use it as a monkey wrench. Monkey wrench, you get it? Unbearable. The worst thing about this mocking contrarian game logic was that it even started to bleed into other genres outside adventure games. So one minute you'd be blasting the invading alien hordes in a shooter, and the next you'd be scouring empty environments in search of the MacGuffin you needed to progress. You might resent quest markers and HUD arrows in modern gaming, but it was a damn sight better than this.
Looks like we got us a deal.
There you are, monsieur. You pay when you return the bike.
Remember the internet? That was fun, wasn't it? And I don't mean this modern internet thingy full of people being cross at each other on social media and constantly distracting us by being right there in our pocket at all times. No, I mean the way the internet was. Do you remember?
1990s internet was a totally different entity to today's equivalent. For starters, it came on discs. Free trial ISP discs that you got with literally everything you purchased. Gaming magazine, free trial CD. New joystick, CD. Bag of Doritos 3Ds because that's what everybody ate back then. Disc.
The internet was on the very fringe of gaming in the 1990s. For most of the decade, it was just a fantasy to most people, but as we neared the year 2000, games like Quake and Ultima Online pushed a new vision of what gaming could be. Dozens of people coming together in one virtual place. It was vastly exciting and more than a little bit scary. Mostly though, it was just complicated. You needed services like GameSpy to find a multiplayer game online, and in the games that didn't use GameSpy, you actually had to manually enter the IP address you wanted to connect to. And don't get me started on setting up a LAN party, the 1990s equivalent of trying to pair Bluetooth headphones to a new device. Still, 1990s dial-up internet was an incredibly exciting frontier.
We're a bit spoiled by technology these days, aren't we? At times it even feels like a major inconvenience when the card machine isn't contactless and you have to put your card into the machine and press 5 whole buttons. Oh. However, those of us who do remember what it was like to play Baldur's Gate on release have a zen-like patience about these modern travails.
Because my goodness, did we ever have to faff about swapping CD-ROMs in the 90s. Baldur's Gate came on 5 of them, which meant actually playing the game felt a bit like DJing at a club night. And then they released the Tales of the Sword Coast expansion, so that made 6 discs to keep track of, avoid damaging, and swap into your hard drive whenever you changed areas on the map. And Baldur's Gate wasn't even the worst offender. It might sound like a huge inconvenience having a prompt show up every few minutes to tell you it's time to dip back into your game box, but honestly, it wasn't. We were also excited by what lay within those many CD-ROMs to grumble.
Now it's time to celebrate one of the absolute best things about being a PC gamer in the 1990s. You won't believe me when I tell you this, but developers used to just give away huge chunks of their games and you could play them as much as you liked. What?
They were called demos and they were the most wonderful thing ever. Demo discs could be found sellotaped to gaming magazines, and they offered really rather generous glimpses of the full games they intended to sell. Half-Life's demo, Uplink, featured a completely new scenario, for example, built from cut chapters of the full game.
Given that many of us were actual children in the 1990s, we didn't have a lot of disposable income to burn on new games every month, and so demo discs offered us a way to sample it all and decide what we really needed to nag our parents for.
But it also broadened our horizons. Gamers with no interest in motorsport were sucked in by TOCA 2 and Colin McRae Rally's ace demos, and people who were there just for the latest, greatest gory shooter found themselves plotting thoughtful freight routes in Railroad Tycoon 2. Because why not? There's a big old piece of game going free, what are you going to do? Not play it?
Look, we've all dropped £8 on a new set of glittery booties for our fantasy RPG avatar when the moment took us, and that's just the world we live in now. DLC is part of the games industry. Some people might consider it a relatively new phenomenon. After all, we weren't buying horse armour for the 2006 equestrian classic Pippa Funnel Take the Reins, now were we? But back in the olden days, we had something different to DLC. Something, dare I say, better?
2 decades ago, when a game developer came out of the woodwork to announce they'd made something new for that same title, you knew it wasn't going to be an alternate outfit in a new gun. This was the age of expansion packs.
Expansion packs were slightly shorter new games that lived within the game you already had. Our old friend Half-Life got 3 of them, each adding 5 or 6 more hours to the campaign by telling the story from a different perspective.
Corporal Shepherd, huh? Looks more like Corporal Dog Meat to me!
Baldur's Gate Tales of the Sword Coast, which we mentioned earlier, added about 20 hours of new campaign. These were meaty, substantial new chunks of game, and they usually cost less than $20. Mind you, this was in the days when a house would cost you about $2,000.
I'm finished with you, soldier! Proceed to the next area and report to the next drill instructor!
Blur or Oasis? Sonic or Mario, Britney or Christina, Jack or Rose, the 90s were positively brimming with rivalries, and we're giving you the chance to show your allegiance with a poll right now. Who was your gaming icon of the decade?
Rivalries, eh? Sometimes they just make for a terrible link to the next item in a video listicle, and sometimes, like the games industry 20 years ago for example, they just make things better. Take the age-old Quake vs Unreal argument. There are no losers there, just two franchises raising the bar for shooters throughout the 90s, inventing the multiplayer FPS as we still know it today, and a whole load of gamers who had not one, but two excellent choices when they went down to the shops, which was a thing people did back then.
3DFX versus ATI was another great rivalry of the 90s. You could say it was the Nvidia versus AMD of its day, since they were the two big graphics card giants doing battle in the gaming space. In fact, Nvidia later acquired 3DFX and ATI was bought by AMD.
But back then, the battle seemed so much closer. For every Voodoo 2 acolyte you met, there was an equally passionate Rage Pro gamer. And these were the days before corporate Twitter accounts, astroturfing marketing campaigns, or even targeted ads. The great rivalries of the 90s were fought in games mags and by word of mouth. Must we journey back into the present? We were getting all warm and comfy in the olden days then. Never mind, while we alphabeticize our 90s CD jewel cases and lament the ever-increasing price of Lucky Charms, why not hit the like button and tell us your own favourite 90s memories in the comments below. You can subscribe to our channel for more like this, and remember to turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. Catch you on the flip side, homies.